اسمعوا صوت السماء جاء المسيح جاء المسيح نیز بشنو زمین آمد امام کامگار آمد امام کامگار.
Assalamu alaikum, gentlemen. Welcome to the MTA studios. We've got a really special opportunity today, actually, Usman Saab, Safir Saab, because we're here to talk about the Promised Messiah Day. And lots of memories, growing up here in this country, Usman Saab, I mean, you must have memories of the Promised Messiah Day, going to the masjid, listening to the speeches. As you get older, you get different responsibilities within the Jamaat. And it comes to us all, Usman Saab, it comes to us all. You get different responsibilities, and sometimes you get expected to stand up and make a speech and really try and crystallize in your own mind as well what that message means and what the essence of that message is.
Absolutely. I think for me, one thing that stood out, again, when I was very fortunate, we were born and raised Ahmadiyya Muslims, never really questioned faith. We just, parents at Ahmadiyya would go to the mosque regularly, we attend these functions. But what stood out for me always, and what kind of led my interest in wanting to find more, and it's something we're going to delve more into now, but it's like how someone over 100 years ago, where the world wasn't as developed as it is now, we have to take ourselves out of 2023 to really understand how amazing, how divinely guided the Promised Messiah was, in the sense that he stood up in a small village of Qadian. And now that same message is across 200 countries of the world. Just this one small point was a huge kind of inspiration for me to wanting to find more. That actually there must be some truth in this claim for someone to be this successful.
And the remarkable thing is, Safir Saab, that the prophecy which was vouchsafed to the Promised Messiah about how his message would spread, at the time, it would have seemed ridiculous.
Yeah, I mean, if the prophecies you look at, very ambitious. At the time, as Usman also said, that, the Promised Messiah Islam in a small village, even in India, people didn't really know at that time. And then to a stage where you have Ahmadiyya Muslim missions across the world, wherever you go. And I'm sure we're going to talk about later as well, Africa as well, how countries in Africa, people are so devoted to Ahmadiyya just because of the Promised Messiah.
And the one prophecy that every Ahmadi knows, I will cause thy message to reach the corners of the earth. And as a special treat, we are going to reach the corners of the earth today as well. And we are going to have the opportunity to speak to Ahmadis around the world to really learn something about how the message of Ahmadiyya was spread to every corner of the earth. But of course, in making that journey, we have to start with Qadian.
Yep.
Could you tell us a little something about how the message of the Promised Messiah started in Qadian?
Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Hazrat Mirza Ghulam Ahmad alayhi salam claimed to be the promised Messiah and reformer of the later days. His divine message originated from a remote village of Qadian. There was no concept of any publication of newspapers and magazines. There were no proper channels of transportation and communication here in Qadian. The roads were very poor and there were only a few shops. Hazrat Bhai Abdur Rahman radiyallahu anhu, who was a very close companion of the Promised Messiah alayhi salam, when first wished to visit Qadian around 1895, says that the absence of any proper means to reach Qadian was such that even finding a mode of transport was a difficult feat. Later on, the mode of transport that became available consisted either of a cart pulled by blocks or similar animals, or a horse-driven carriage. Also, the situation within Qadian itself was not much better. Hazrat Bhai Abdur Rahman radiallahu anhu says that there were old ruins, the town being almost deserted with air of sadness all around, was as if it was in a state of mourning. There were 2 bazaars with just a handful of shops selling a few commodities of poor quality. Most of requirements had to be obtained from the 2 nearest towns of Batala and Amritsar. So this was the Qadian from where Hazrat Mirza Ghulam Ahmad alayhi salam claimed to be the Mahdi, the Messiah, and proclaimed that his mission was to reform the whole mankind. And Allah the Almighty revealed to him that I shall cause thy message to reach the corners of the earth. The opponents ridiculed and mocked at him and left no stone unturned to stop and subdue this divine message. But they failed miserably and were humiliated by Allah. This prophecy got fulfilled in letter and spirit. The pious and guided people flocked to Qadian and entered his fold. The remote and unknown village of Qadian became famous and familiar. Newspapers, magazines, and books got published. Press was also established. And the message of promised Messiah alayhi salam began to spread in the world, and his message had reached to the corners of the globe in his lifetime. After the demise of the promised Messiah alayhi salam, Allah bestowed certain means of communication to spread this message under the divine institution of Khilafat. Centers of Jamaat for propagation were established throughout the world. Then, world witnessed the live transmission of this message from Qadian through satellite during the blessed era of Hazrat Khalifatul Masih Khamis Ayyadahullah Ta'ala bin Nasir Aziz. MTA, under the guidance of Huzur Anwar, is playing a vital role in spreading the message of the promised Messiah alayhi salam to the corners of the world. This rapid advancement is solely a result of the promise that Allah made to the promised Messiah alayhi salam. How nicely the promised Messiah alayhi salam says in his Urdu poem, "मैं था गरीब व बेकसो गुमनाम व बेहुनर, कोई न जानता था कि है कादियाँ किधर। लोगों की इस तरफ को ज़रा भी नज़र न थी, मेरे वजूद की भी किसी को खबर न थी। अब देखते हो कैसा रुजूए जहाँ हुआ, एक मरजे खवास यही कादियाँ हुआ."
And that was just amazing, wasn't it? Just listening to that and learning about the humble beginnings of the Jamaat, really, in Qadian. And as we said, that prophecy, I will cause thy message to reach the corners of the earth. And again, Allah spoke to the promised Messiah and gave him that glad tiding that the message would spread throughout the world. And it's just incredible to think.
I actually want to ask you, because we haven't had the opportunity to go there, inshallah, one day we will, but you've actually been there.
Yeah.
So, and this is so important to realize that actually our Jamaat, regardless where you're from, we're one body. So how was it for you kind of going there and experiencing it for the first time?
It's not really something that you can express in words, I think, because, as we said, we all grow up, we listen to those accounts, those narratives of the life of the promised Messiah and the fulfillment of the prophecies of the Holy Prophet ﷺ in the person of the promised Messiah and the revival of Islam, and how he fought throughout his entire adult life to bring the true message of Islam to the world. And then you find yourself walking those streets where the promised Messiah walked, and you find yourself in that masjid that the promised Messiah prayed in. And it's an incredible feeling, absolutely amazing, and just a blessing in every sense. And when you're there, you go and you're just walking through the streets, the markets, you meet ordinary people, and you will find extraordinary stories relating back to that time as well. People whose parents, grandparents, great-grandparents were part of that tapestry of the history of Ahmadiyyat in Qadian. So it's really amazing just going there and seeing those sites and hearing those stories. And one thing, Sfisab, when you go there, when they hear that you've come from London, there's a special love, actually, because they also recognize that at the time of the Promised Messiah, London was seen as a very special place, actually in some ways the center of the world, because it was the seat of the British Empire, and the British Empire, the sun never set on the British Empire, and at the time the empire spread throughout the world, including in India. And so the idea that the message of the Promised Messiah could spread to London was an incredible one. And yet we find very early in the history of the Jamaat that the message of the Promised Messiah is spread, and the message of Jamaat Ahmadiyya is spread in London.
Yeah, I think there has to be some divine, obviously plan behind this, because now we have Khilafat here, and the successors of the Promised Messiah, driving the Jamaat forward from London, from England here. So it's a great connection there.
And we're really lucky because we get to speak to Naseem Bajwa Sahab. Assalamu alaikum, Naseem Bajwa Sahab. Thank you for joining us today. My first question to you is, please tell us about Fateh Muhammad Sihal Sahib and the significance of him coming to London.
Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Thank you for your question. Hazrat Chaudhry Fateh Muhammad Sahib Sihal was the first missionary of the Jamaat Ahmadiyya in United Kingdom. He was the companion of the Promised Messiah, peace be upon him, and he came here on 25th of July 1913. In fact, he did his master's degree before he came here, and he dedicated his life for this service of Islam Ahmadiyya. But the first foreign mission was established in UK, and that was in 1913, in the time of the first Khalifa, Hazrat Maulana Nuruddin Sahib. He sent Hazrat Chaudhry Fateh Muhammad Sahib Sihal to UK. And as I've already mentioned, that on 25th of July 1913, he arrived here in UK. First 2 weeks he stayed in London, and then he went to Woking, because Khaja Kamaluddin Sahib was already there, who was working. So he stayed there with him for about 9 months. During that period, the first Khalifa, Hazrat Maulana Nuruddin Sahib, passed away, and Hazrat Mirza Bashiruddin Mahmud Ahmad Sahib was elected as the second Khalifa. So, as far as Hazrat Chaudhry Fateh Muhammad Sahib Sihal is concerned, he accepted the second Khalifa as well. And under his instruction, he came to London and he hired some accommodation here and started his work as a missionary. So this is how the work of the Ahmadiyya mission, or I should say the first foreign mission, was started from London.
Jazakallah, Naseem Bajwa Sahab. And just incredible to think at that time, 1913, I mean, we're talking about, the British Empire is still there throughout the world. And this is before the First World War, before the Second World War, before the world is transformed in all sorts of exceptional ways. And traveling to London would have been no mean feat as well. And yet you see someone who would have just gone, and the only thing he would have had in his heart is his faith. No expectation, no understanding of what might happen when he arrived, and just sent to spread the message.
It's like putting it into context in this day and age. It's like saying to someone, just start up a business from scratch. How difficult would someone find it, even in this day and age with all the resources available in London or in UK or any part of the world, to not just establish a business but make it successful, so that it lasts for eternity. So in those times, you're right. He was sent by, there was no established Jamaat here as such. He was sent as the first missionary to go establish a Jamaat at that time of what looked like the center of the world. We know now to be the center of the world because Khilafat is here. But you're right. In those times, we've got to take ourselves, again, I always say with these conversations, we've got to take ourselves out of our resources and our experiences to truly understand how magnificent this was.
And the Jamaat didn't have great resources at that time either. Now, alhamdulillah, Jamaat is blessed as the time has gone. But at that time, there was pretty much like a one-way ticket in many instances where missionaries were sent and then they didn't know when they were going to come back.
When the Jamaat was considering to buy this mosque or this kind of plot, at the time, some people had concerns that because Sarfud or Wandsworth wasn't really central London, it was the suburbs of London, so Azul, we shouldn't buy this land, we should buy something more central. And Azul at that time said, no, if it's not considered it now, it will be considered. And look at how it is now. It's like, that is the hub of kind of, if you Google, so I work there as a Murabbi, I have the great fortune to work there, an honor of working there. And there are a lot of schools who just kind of Google London Mosque or Mosque in London, and Fazl Mosque comes up and then they call us, and then it's a great opportunity for them to visit, and we then introduce who we are. So it's amazing. Like you said, it's so historic.
Oh, mashallah. And from there, from the London Mosque, that historic mosque, now to Bait al-Futuh, and by the grace of Allah, the recent inaugural event which occurred in the new complex of Bait al-Futuh. Incredible.
Like I said, you know, if you take, it's such a weird thing to say, but if you take religion out of it and just look at it as there's this one community that started 130 years ago in a small village in Qadian, and now probably in the most expensive city in the world, it's got two landmark mosques. And one being the Bait al-Futuh, which is so befitting of the name, the House of Victories, and one being the first purpose-built mosque in London, which has its own history attached to it.
We're talking about spreading the message of the promised Messiah. And Bait al-Futuh Mosque is significant also because it is the seat of MTA Studios, which we happen to be in today.
Yeah, we have to say that.
And of course, we have to mention Voice of Islam as well.
Of course. Yeah. And we're home of Voice of Islam.
Yes, alhamdulillah. I mean, this is also spreading the message of the promised Messiah to the corners of the world. It's amazing. You look at this, and I think, as Usman said, that if you take everything away and you just look at this single prophecy, I shall cause thy message to reach the corners of the earth, and the ways, the avenues that Allah the Almighty has opened, it's just incredible. I think that should be enough for somebody to understand that this, the Prophet Messiah was true.
And from one corner of the earth to the very other end of the earth, and we have the opportunity to talk to Imran Malik Sahib in Australia. Assalamu alaikum, Imran Sahib. Can you tell us a little something about how the message of Islam Ahmadiyya reached Australia?
Wa alaikum assalam rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. As you mentioned already, Australia is one of those fortunate countries in the world where the message of promised Messiah Islam reached in his lifetime. And not only his message reached here, but there were many people who accepted that message and became Ahmadis. And when we consider the distance between Qadian and Australia at that time and the limited resources of Jamaat, and then we find that it is just sheer grace of Almighty Allah that how He make these arrangements for promised Messiah Islam to reach to Australian shore, to a new continent. If we look at the history, it was in early 1900s when in different newspapers the name of the promised Messiah Islam appeared with the titles Muhammadan Messiah or Messiah in India. But it was in 1903 when Hazrat Hassan Musa Khan Sahib Razillah Ta'ala Anhu accepted Ahmadiyyat. He has the honor of being the first Ahmadi of Australia, and he has also the distinction to be the first Musi outside subcontinent. And it was Hazrat Hassan Musa Khan Sahib who actually passed this message of the promised Messiah Islam, of true Islam Ahmadiyyat, through different channels, not only to Australia, but in the neighboring countries as well as to the islands across Australia.
Jazakallah Imran Sahib. So, I mean, just incredible stories of exceptional people who recognized the truth of the promised Messiah at that time, during his lifetime, a blessing in itself, but in a far-flung land.
You know, like nowadays, society generally is more accepting. So if someone, let's say, converts, in some cases, it's easier. Like you have to remember, at that time, where there could be an element of risk for you to stand up and say, go against your family tradition, say, look, I believe, I've accepted this Messiah because I've recognized all the signs. You know, you're boycotted, there's so much enmity towards you, you go through certain persecution. So in all the way in Australia, like such an amazing thing to see here, that from the message and the distance from Qadian to Australia, there's one person who said, okay, no, this is true. And he accepted it. And he then kind of continued to preach what he had found. So it's an amazing story.
And also it was interesting to see that the Alexander Dowie, prophecy that the Promised Messiah made, and his end after challenging the Promised Messiah reached the other corner as well. It was picked up by journalists, it was picked up by, and certainly so many people must have read that, and by that way they were introduced to the Promised Messiah and the community.
No, absolutely. And you know, it nicely segues through to the United States and how the message of Jamaat Ahmadiyya and the message of the Promised Messiah was spread to the United States. And we're very lucky that we can speak to our friends in the USA. And Amjad Khan Sahib, assalamu alaikum. Thank you for joining us today. And my question to you is, can you tell us about the establishment of Islam Ahmadiyyat in how it reached the USA and how that was a testimony to the truthfulness of the Promised Messiah?
Yes, indeed. And a very important introduction of the Ahmadiyya Muslim community and the words of the Promised Messiah Islam to America also took place in 1902, when the Promised Messiah Islam directly challenged Dr. John Alexander Dowie, a very famous figure in America worth hundreds of millions of dollars, developed this large following to establish a new brand of Christianity to annihilate Islam. The Promised Messiah Islam challenged him to a prayer duel, and that captured the imagination of Americans in over 160 newspapers between 1902 and 1907. This prayer challenge, from its inception to its completion in the victory of the Promised Messiah Islam against Dr. Dowie, was published all throughout America in some of the most prominent American publications, including in many articles in the New York Times. And of course, this was a very profound introduction of the Ahmadiyya Muslim community and the Promised Messiah Islam as the Mahdi and the Messiah to the people of America.
And that was, again, you know, that recollection of something really exceptional in terms of the fulfillment of a prophecy and a fulfillment of something that really showed the truth of the Promised Messiah. And there were many enemies of the Promised Messiah, many people who stood up against the truth of the Promised Messiah during his lifetime. But we see in Alexander Dowie, we see someone who really challenged in a very public way the truth of the Promised Messiah in a country like the United States. And his end was there for everyone to see.
And it's interesting to see, I mean, you only have to go back and watch all of the MTA coverage of Hazur's previous tour. It's amazing. It's such a inspirational thing to watch, and it almost sometimes gives you goosebumps, because when you know this history, for example, when you want to start a campaign, the basic thing you require is funding. And this guy had that funding. It was very well off. I know we can't go into it, but if you compare just his funding and how much resources he had compared to the Promised Messiah Islam, and now look at the outcome 100 years later. And we're still only saying on the basis of because he's a true prophet and the Messiah that was prophesied to come. So you're right, it's such an amazing, if you just look at the facts and the result of what happened, it's so kind of inspiring.
And the only reason his name is remembered, Dowie's name is remembered, is because he tried to stand up against the Promised Messiah and failed utterly.
And recently when Hazur obviously went to inaugurate the mosque there.
in Zion.
And he was given the key to the city, which actually it's amazing, as you mentioned.
It was goosebumps.
Yeah,
I
it
have
was
to say,
goosebumps.
it was incredible.
That it will be remembered because of the promised Messiah.
Yeah. And again, thinking about those early MDs and Mufti Muhammad Sadiq Sahib, who went there, and again, huge sacrifices, and just landed there and just, went for it. And he was there to spread the message. And from the very beginning, at the point at which he landed in the United States, passing through immigration, he wasn't thinking about anything else apart from doing tabligh.
Even on the travels, he was doing tabligh, and that's why we have, mashallah, so many African Ahmadis, American Ahmadis there, and a lot of them obviously go way back to that time as well. And not only missionary Mufti Muhammad Sadiq Sahib, but also I think there was a gentleman whose name was Muhammad Alexander Russell Webb. He was actually also writing letters to the Promised Messiah even before that. And I didn't know about that actually, and I came to know that he was writing to get guidance on Islamic teachings, and I think he was participating in World Parliament of Religions, and he was actually explaining the Islamic viewpoint there, and he would get guidance from the Promised Messiah through letters. So it's amazing.
Yeah, I think he used to get guidance on the basis that he said that I feel that you are divinely guided, so I want your advice. So again, and this is at that time, we've seen it now that world leaders come and meet our beloved Hazur and they get advice, but at that time where you have to keep in mind like the difficulties that they would face in terms of like getting your message across to the world,
Days, weeks, months.
how long it takes. But yeah, even you mentioned Rabbi Sahib in America, Mufti Muhammad Sadiq Sahib, he would also write in their local newspaper, I believe it was Muslim Sunrise newspaper, just to spread the message, and all of these different tools were used as to spread the message of Islam Ahmadiyyat.
And it's again another amazing example of how the message of the Promised Messiah was spread around the world, and there are some wonderful examples from the early history of the Jamaat in the USA, but it's not the only country. And I mean, one of the special things about Jalsa Salana, I just have to say this, and of course you're wearing an Indonesian cap, and it's a bit of a legacy thing now. But back in the day when it started, it was, everyone was like, well, because they're ventilated and yeah. But the history of the Jamaat in Indonesia is just amazing when you hear it, and how, those first MDs were Indonesian. They were Indonesians who received the message of the Promised Messiah, and then they became MDs, and they then spread from there. And it's absolutely amazing. And we have to speak to someone from Indonesia to hear the story from them. And Dr. Munawar Ahmed from Indonesia, Assalamu alaikum. Can you tell us about how the establishment of Islam Ahmadiyya in Indonesia testifies to the truthfulness of the Promised Messiah?
Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Jazakumullah for your question about the Indonesia Ahmadiyya progression. Well, I want to talk to you about the Ahmadiyya in Indonesia is beginning from 3 students from Sumatra come to India, and then they came to Qadian. In Qadian, he met Hazrat Khalid Masih second, and then after that, he asked to the Hazrat Khalid Masih second about invitation from the student to him. And after that, the Hazrat Khalid Masih second sent Mr. Muhammad Rahmat Ali Haote to Indonesia, and he came in Tapak Tuan at 1925. At 1925, and after that is spreading Jamaat in Sumatra and in Java. The historic moment for our Jamaat Ahmadiyya is at year 2000, where Hazrat Khalid Masih come to Indonesia, and then he met our president and our parliament of Indonesia. This is the truth of Ahmadiyya, the truth of Masih Maud alayhi salam, because Ahmadiyya Indonesia is a big country for Muslim, and now in 2023 we have 412 branch in Indonesia, and then we have also 460 mosques around Indonesia. This is the important thing for our Jamaat, and this is the proof of the truth of Masih Maud alayhi salam about Ahmadiyya.
Jazakallah, Dr. Munawwar Sahib. And I mean, it's just amazing.
Branches is huge. Like it's and over 400 mosques as well. That's a very big number.
So it's always lovely to meet Indonesian Ahmadis when they come for Jalsa Salana. We're talking about Jalsa Salana. I think we perhaps don't recognize how big a Jamaat is there. When we sit here in London, we don't recognize how big a Jamaat is there in Indonesia. And another beautiful example of how the message of the promised Messiah spread. And of course, the first MD to go to Indonesia then in the 1920s at the time of the second Khalifa. And again, incredible sacrifices.
There were students, I believe you mentioned.
Yes.
Really, yeah. So that in itself is like a huge thing.
Yeah.
That at that young age, they knew that they had to accept, or they had to kind of go and find out more and kind of help their other fellow Muslim brothers to reach the truth. It's huge sacrifice.
The pictures, when you see them, that's how you learn that this is this is the history. And you look at, they took on that long journey to come to meet the promised Messiah or the Khalifatul Masih Sani, and going back with that message and spreading that. And now the result, mashallah, it's amazing.
We have to go to Mauritius now, because very, very special, and we get to speak to Amir Saab, Mauritius. And Assalamu alaikum, Amir Saab, thank you for joining us today. Could you tell me something about the first missionary who came to Mauritius and the setting up of the first Jamaat there?
Wa alaikum salam. Jazakumullah for asking this question. Actually, it was Hazrat Muslim Maud anhu who sent the first missionary to Mauritius in 1915. It was following a request from some gentlemen who joined the Jamaat 1 year earlier. Actually, it was Maulana Sufi Ghulam Muhammad Sahib was the first missionary. He came to Mauritius by ship, but he wasn't allowed to get down due to some opponents, mainly non-Ahmadi Muslims. However, the few Ahmadi members that we had at that time, they tried all their best and they managed to get the missionary in Mauritius.
And it's, again, an incredible testament to the Jamaat, isn't it? That they're in this small island nation, Mauritius, that there's not a corner of the world that's forgotten in this story of the Jamaat. As we know, it's spread to every country in the world now. But even in that early history of Jamaat Ahmadiyya, the Khulafa had their eye on ensuring that message was spread everywhere.
And I think one point for me, again, very personal to me, that is always a sign of truthfulness, is that regardless, one proof of someone's truthfulness is regardless of the hurdles that are presented before them. And in this case, for example, they didn't let him get off the ship, meaning they tried to do everything to stop that message of Ahmadiyyat or the missionary of Ahmadiyyat to kind of come to their country and start preaching. But regardless of their hurdles, regardless of their enmity, and this is across history and not just in Mauritius, but in every country of the world, is something it's very common, that it doesn't stop us. And our progression kind of, it goes from strength to strength. So again, that is one, for me, very personal thing, that it's, if someone says they're from God, why would God aid them if it wasn't true? And it wasn't just one attempt. There are hundreds of attempts across hundreds of countries where people have tried to stop Ahmadiyya from spreading.
And look, in the beginning, in many places, obviously, the opposition was there. Maybe for many people, it was very new, and maybe many people thought, okay, this is a challenge to our way of life or system. But Allah the Almighty then changed that in the favor of the Jamaat over time, because I know a lot of Mauritius, some in my Jamaat as well, who are very passionate about Mauritius, and they say that, if you live in Mauritius, not only is the weather nice and everything is nice, but you also have religious freedom now. So things must have changed from the beginning, and Jamaat flourished, and it's one of the oldest Jamaats as well, I believe.
There's another example, actually. We're going to go to Germany now. because in 2014 we celebrated in the UK the centenary of the Jamaat here in the UK, and this year, by the grace of Allah, Germany is celebrating its centenary of the Jamaat in Germany. But those early years were incredibly tumultuous, and thinking about what Germany passed through as well in terms of the Second World War and the societal changes, it is an amazing history, and we get to speak to Amir Saab Germany. So let's turn to him. Amir Saab, assalamu alaikum. Thank you for joining us today. Germany is celebrating its 100-year jubilee. What does that mean for the truthfulness of the promised Messiah, alayhi salam?
Wa alaikum salam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Jazakumullah for this question. It's indeed a time now to reflect on this issue, because 100 years we are celebrating this year Ahmadiyyat in Germany, and we can see the truthfulness of the promised Messiah, especially in the reactions of the people who come to know about Islam Ahmadiyyat. Nowadays, we can say that we have distributed 65 million leaflets to the Germans, and many millions have, consented. They have realized that Islam Ahmadiyyat is here in this country. They have formed the most stable Islamic organization, and we are standing for truthfulness, we are standing for peace, we are standing for love for all, hatred for none. And during the last celebrations, we have seen people reacting in a way I've never seen before. They want to know, what does it mean, a living God? Yeah? How we can get, this communion with God. So people, when they listen to our speeches, when they listen to the Khalifa, when they listen to the word, for example, in the video of the third Khalifa, when he said, how you want to conduct your mission, and he said, we want to win their hearts. Then everybody was smiling, and they were saying, that's really what we see from Ahmadiyyat. Yeah? And I think this is in the moment being developed more and more in 250 Jamaats throughout Germany, that Ahmadis have started winning the hearts of the people, and only through following the promised Messiah, alayhi salam, who has had this mission that he wanted to bring together, man with God Almighty. Yeah.
Jazakallah, Amir Saab. Just amazing stories.
Yeah, I think one thing that Amir Saab said that stuck with me is that not only, like we've spoken to so many different people from across the world, does it prove the truthfulness of this prophecy, but like Amir Saab said, it proves that there's a living God. And in this day and age, if you look at the root cause of all the issues that we face in society, it's because people have gone away from Allah Ta'ala. So this again is a huge proof of not just that this promised Messiah Islam as a Muslim Islam was that Messiah Mahdi, but also that there's a living God who speaks today. And the progress of the Jamaat in all of the different countries, all the corners of the world, is proof of that as well.
And again, thinking about the early history of the Jamaat and those missionaries, Maulvi Mubarak Ali Sahib was the first missionary in Germany, and the establishment of the Nur Mosque, the first mosque, and it's amazing to see its transformation and the fact that it has gone through all of that time and through a difficult history.
Yeah, absolutely. Also, I think with regards to the 100 years of the Jamaat there, another, I think, very remarkable target that the Jamaat Germany has is about building 100 mosques. And I think there are over 50 now, alhamdulillah. So that is also going to go a long way to spread Islam Ahmadiyyat in obviously new cities and Germany's vast country as well. So that is going to be also a fulfillment of this prophecy, I think.
We can't forget Africa.
Of course not.
We haven't.
And in many ways, West Africa, Sub-Saharan Africa, West Africa, and those names trip off the tongue, don't they? The Gambia, Ghana, Sierra Leone, Liberia, and for some of us, amazing memories of going and visiting those places. I'm sure that you both of you have amazing stories, and when you go there, you really feel, when you talk to the people there, you really feel something very special. You must have something to tell about.
Yeah, alhamdulillah. I was fortunate to go to Sierra Leone, where I believe Maulana Abdul Rahman Nayar Sahib also was the pioneer missionary, and the people there are so passionate and dedicated towards the Jamaat. I remember with the local missionary, we had this was around Eid al-Adha, and we were supposed to pick up some goats and put them in the back of the truck and then go to a village to do Eid Qurbani there. It was really a whole new experience for us that we have never done that before, right? We would just go Chanda.org and do the Qurbani. But actually went there, it took 3 or 4 hours. We went through a really treacherous route through the forest, came to a village. Literally there was no electricity, nothing, and mud houses. And we go into the mosque or the place where they had the center, and you see a big picture of the Promised Messiah there. And I think that was mind blowing for me to see that there's nothing here, no electricity, out in the middle of nowhere, and what they have is the picture of the Promised Messiah in there.
I remember my first memory of, you can say, Ghana, because we mentioned Ghana, is the documentary that MTA prepared of Hazur's tour of Ghana. And that one specific scene where Hazur was on the balcony, and there's hundreds, if not thousands, of Ahmadis just waving at Hazur, expressing their love. That was one of the most amazing, inspiring, emotional scenes I've witnessed. That actually, in the broader picture, it shows you how big of a family we are. Because ultimately, we're one big family. Our Jamaat is one family. We're all connected, regardless where we're from, what our background is. But I'll give you an example of Ghana. So I had the opportunity to go to Liberia as part of, after graduating, we went there for 2 months. And we were traveling from one city to the other. And it's just part of your route because the roads aren't developed, so you're bound to get a tire punctured. So they told, before we entered this one village, they said that I pray that our tire doesn't puncture here because this is really not a place where we want to stop. It's quite dangerous. And lo and behold, the tire popped. So then there's a huge crowd of people that crowded our car. They saw that we're from outside, and everyone was like, "Oh, we want to help because we want to get paid for helping." As soon as one of them asked, "Oh, brothers, where are you guys going?" Because we're going to the main mosque in Monrovia, we're Ahmadi Muslims. That's all we said. We're Ahmadi Muslims. The guy took charge of the situation. He cleared everyone out. He goes, "No, go away out. I'm going to handle this. They're my guest, essentially." And then when he cleared everyone away, he said that, "I actually studied in an Ahmadiyya school in Ghana." And he goes, "I am ever in debt for your community." And he goes, "That's why, don't worry, free of charge, I'm going to fix your tire." And that's when I realized the beauty of how much this message has spread to the corners of the world, where this guy's not even Ahmadi, but the fact that he studied in an Ahmadi school in Ghana, and now he's in Liberia and he's helped us out. So it's an amazing feeling. It really gives you a sense of, it's that beauty of when you stand in namaz, regardless of your race, background, wealth, you're united. And I think this prophecy, the fulfillment of this prophecy shows that as well, that regardless of where we're from, we're united in the sense that we've accepted this Messiah. And that one common ground is enough for us to stand shoulder to shoulder, regardless where we are in the world.
Jazakallah. And we have the opportunity to speak to Ghana. So let's go to him now. And can you tell us how Ahmadiyyat reached Ghana?
Wa alaikum salam wa rahmatullahi ta'ala wa barakatuhu. Jamaat Ahmadiyyat was established in Ghana as far back as the year 1921. It started in the form that a gentleman called Yusuf Nyakun, he saw in a dream. Meanwhile, he belonged to a Jamaat of Muslims here in Ghana, in the coastal town of Ekrofo. He saw in a dream that they were saying Salat one day, and their Imam was a white man. A white man, to the Ghanaian at that time, wasn't somebody who was known to be a Muslim. So it was strange for them to see a white man saying Salat, not only saying Salat, but leading other Muslims in Salat. They didn't understand what the meaning of the dream was. Yusuf Nyako had a friend at Saltpond, which was a coastal town, which was also a port town. The friend is called Pedro. He was a Nigerian, a merchant. He met him and told him the dream. And Pedro drew his attention to the fact that, yes, he's been seeing a magazine written by some Muslims from London who are obviously white. Maybe the other people. Their address was there of the international headquarters of the Jamaat. So those Muslims, Fanti Muslims, decided to write to the headquarters and to request a missionary. It was then that they were asked to send the cost involved in the transportation of a missionary. They did that, and at the end of it all, Al-Hajj Abdurrahim Nayar was dispatched to Ghana, and he got here in the year 1921. And that is how Jamaat Ahmadiyyat started in Ghana.
And can you tell us how that testifies to the truth of the promised Messiah, alayhi salam?
Jazakallah for this question also. The fact is that Hazrat Mirza Ghulam Ahmad was the founder of the Ahmadiyya Muslim Jamaat. He was a prophet of God. And when he claimed prophethood, he did also mention that Allah Ta'ala did reveal to him, saying that, "Main tere tabligh ko zameen ke kinaron tak pahuncha," that I will cause your message to reach all the corners of the earth. Then another revelation was also received by him in Arabic, which said that Yansuruka rijalun nuhi ilayhim minas samai. Now, that we shall assist and help you with people who will be spiritually prepared and who will send from the heavens to come and assist you in carrying out your work. Now, if you come to think of these two revelations that were received by Hazrat Mirza Ghulam Ahmad about Jamaat Ahmadiyyat, and come to think of the extent to which Jamaat Ahmadiyyat has spread throughout the whole world, such that, as we said, we have more than 200 countries in which Ahmadiyyat is solidly established, juxtaposed against Qadian, which is in the Punjab of India, away from Amritsar, an unknown place even today. For someone to come from such an obscure corner to make such an announcement and to back it up with revelations from the Almighty Allah, and for it to materialize to such an extent that you have more than 200 countries, and with me sitting down here in a far corner here in Africa, Ghana, as a leader of Ahmadi Muslims, and talking to you and telling you about the truthfulness of Hazrat Mirza Ghulam Ahmad, you should have no doubt whatsoever in your mind.
Jazakallah. And more amazing stories. And I've personally as well can tell of the Gambia, where I've been many times, and always an amazing reception from MD brothers there in the Gambia. And when they sometimes ask them, I message them and say, "I'm coming, what do you want me to bring?" And they just say, "Just your prayers." And you're coming from the land where Huzur is, where the Khalifa is, and that for us is enough that you're bringing those blessings with you. And it's just amazing to when you hear that, it also humbles you hugely.
They're so devoted. As in, one thing all African countries and the Jamaats have in common, the level of devotion. Yeah. Especially when, for example, I also had the opportunity to go to Nigeria. And we were celebrating their centenary. We went as a sports team to celebrate. It was a tournament that we took part in. So the day before we came back, we had the opportunity to go on a local radio station just to introduce who we are and to preach our message. Now, at that time, because we were living in that village, we knew there were very little resources. We didn't know how many people would be listening to this radio station. One of the boys who gave the interview, he just mentioned that we're going back to London tomorrow. If there's anyone who would like to send a letter to beloved Huzur, we can take it for you and make sure it gets presented before Huzur. Now, when he said that, I in my heart thought, I don't know how many people, one, are listening, and two, I don't know how many people have like the basic resource of a pen and paper here. Lo and behold, the next day in the morning, more than 300 letters were at our doorstep.
Amazing.
Saying that, can you please give this to beloved Huzur? So that again, and it's not just in Nigeria, it's every part of the world. But we're mentioning Africa. But one thing I've witnessed with our African Ahmadi brothers and sisters is their level of devotion. And like Safi mentioned before, in some cases, they've never seen Huzur.
Yes.
They've never heard his voice. They've just accepted a message on whom they were waiting for. They were waiting for this Messiah. They've accepted him, And out of accepting and love and obedience, they are now fully devoted to the cause. So it's an amazing sight.
And now, Sfisab, we have, in terms of the ways in which the message of the promised Messiah spread throughout the world, we have got MTA, we have got the websites, we have got books printed in hundreds of different languages, we have got the radio stations, we've got missionaries, we've got established Jamaats, we have got those Jamaats established with every hue and color of local culture and the personalities and people within those countries as an embodiment of the truth of the promised Messiah. And it's just amazing to think about.
It's amazing. Jamaat Ghana has their own MTA Ghana Studios, which is going to be amazing for the whole of Africa. But I think with all of these things you mentioned, the other aspect of the coming of the promised Messiah was also to serve mankind. And in African countries and in many countries, you see the Jamaat has been able to open hospitals, school, education centers, which has made tremendous difference to the communities. And I think that also is something that people appreciate, right? I mean, if you go and speak to the people there, as you have Usman as well, the people associate themselves with Jamaat's services, and they really appreciate that. And many people have been to Jamaat Ahmadiyya schools, so this is part of the faith. This is also why the Prophet came, to serve people, to bring them, to a next upper level.
Jazakallah, gentlemen. Really fascinating conversation and some beautiful reflections on Promised Messiah Day. And every year, I think we get the opportunity, especially as we get older, to reflect more on the truthfulness of the Promised Messiah. But it's also equally important that we try and put that message out there to younger Ahmadis and get them to really understand and think about what it means to be Ahmadi. So really, really good chatting with both of you. Jazakallah. And I hope our viewers get something useful out of today. Assalamu alaikum.
Isma'u sawta sama Ja'al Masih Ja'al Masih Niz bishna zami Ahmad Imam-e Kamgar Ahmad Imam-e Kamgar